Some love stories don't break in a scream, but drift apart quietly like two once radiant stars no longer sharing the same sky. Audrey Hepburn, the woman the world cherished for her beauty and elegance, once believed love was a stage wide enough for two artistic hearts. And Mel Ferrer, the man who had once led her under Broadway's lights, held her hand through sweet years, only to let go when love no longer felt like a role either of them belonged to. This is not merely a story of a marriage, it's a journey of a woman learning to love both while together and more profoundly while apart. On a spring evening in 1953, at a modest party in London, where soft lights glowed over elegant gowns and laughter mingled with clinking wine glasses, Audrey Hepburn met Mel Ferrer for the first time. She had just entered the spotlight as one of Britain's rising cinematic talents. He, a tall, composed man with a seasoned face, was already a familiar presence on Broadway and in American cinema. Amid classical music and the faint scent of French perfume, their eyes met as if they saw in each other a reflection of their own soul. Mel spoke in a calm, warm voice. "I saw you in Gigi. You weren't just acting, you were living the role." Audrey smiled gently. Her eyes sparkled but held a touch of shyness. Praise had always made her uneasy. But something in the way Mel spoke made her feel safe, like he could see beyond the fame looming ahead. Just weeks later, Mel invited Audrey to co-star with him in Ondine on Broadway, a surreal play where the female lead was the spirit of water, fragile, pure, and unclaimed by anyone. Audrey said yes, not for the role, but because her heart had already fluttered gently like a ripple when he asked. On stage, they were mesmerizing. Off stage, their love bloomed like a classical symphony, never loud but profoundly deep. He guided her, taught her how to breathe like a true stage artist. She made him believe emotions could live even when everything else remained unfinished. They married in September 1954 in a quiet ceremony in Switzerland. No lavish gown, no crowd of well-wishers, just the mountains, the lake, and two dreamers who believed love was like the theater. As long as both believed in the same story, they would never part. But they hadn't yet realized. Not all plays end as fairy tales, and not every stage is big enough for two stars to shine side by side. When Audrey stepped into the world of Hollywood, she brought not only a face like a portrait come to life, but also a gentleness that made people hesitate to touch her too hard. After her breakthrough in Roman Holiday, she became a global icon. Her photos flooded newspapers. Every dress she wore became a trend. People didn't just love her beauty, they loved the quiet way she existed in a world that was always too loud. Mel Ferrer at the time wasn't a sought-after star. He was seasoned, divorced, and though a veteran of the stage, had never basked in the same spotlight as Audrey. And sometimes that difference created a distance between them, even as they shared the same bed, the same meals, the same roof. Audrey still loved him. "Mel is the only one who makes me feel truly valuable," she once said. But every time she filmed in Italy and Paris and New York, while Mel stayed behind to direct or wait, the gap between them grew a little wider. They wrote to each other, letters filled with affection, yet with blank spaces that no word could ever fill. Mel began directing more. He wanted Audrey to act in films he selected the way he envisioned them. War and Peace was one such project, ambitious yet controversial. Whispers followed he was building a stage for his own ego, using Audrey's light to illuminate himself. Audrey never objected. She was not one for confrontation, but her silences grew longer. And in those silences, cracks began to form, not through arguments, but through the quiet drifting apart of two people who once believed love would be enough. They still appeared together at events, still smiled, still held hands. But when the lights went off, when the applause faded, Audrey would sit alone in hotel rooms, eyes fixed on distant windows, wondering if anyone could see the woman learning how not to fall apart. And Mel perhaps was lonely in his own way. The man who had once been the foundation now lived in the shadow of a wife who made the whole world bow. Love hadn't vanished, but it was slowly changing shape. Not all winters come from weather. Some settle in the heart when hope becomes as fragile as breath against glass. For Audrey, that winter stretched for years. She longed for a child only to have each pregnancy end in silence. After 2 miscarriages, Audrey slowed down. She turned down scripts, withdrew from Hollywood's noise to devote herself to health and hope. "I don't need another Oscar," she said. "I just need one child, just one, to pour the rest of my life into." Mel, already in his 40s, didn't speak much about his feelings. He was private, pragmatic, rarely expressive. But Audrey knew each time he saw her weakened by medication and worry something aged quietly inside him too. Then in the spring of 1960, a small miracle arrived. Audrey became pregnant again, and this time it held. She quit acting completely, left the spotlight, moved to the Swiss countryside, walked beneath trees, read children's books, and spoke daily to the unborn baby as if to a dear friend. Mel stayed close. They walked, bought milk, cooked together. They took photos just for themselves. In those quiet months, Audrey felt a new kind of happiness, not dazzling, but deeply peaceful. Hepburn Ferrer was born in July 1960. Audrey held her son like a dream nearly lost. "I wasn't born to be a star," she said. "I was born to be called Mom." But joy came with cost. Audrey wanted to withdraw entirely to give herself fully to family. But Mel, who'd grown used to a wife who shone brightly, who was driven and admired, no longer recognized the changing woman beside him. Their son came, but the distance between them remained, like two figures standing in snow holding hands, yet still cold. As Sean grew, Audrey continued to change. She no longer gravitated toward Hollywood's invitations. Instead, she learned to live slowly, walking lakeside, with her son watching clouds drift, cooking simple meals. "I don't need to be on screen to feel real," she said. But Mel was different. He still craved the stage, the set, the script meetings that ran past midnight. He wanted Audrey to return to acting, not just because she was a star, but because he felt a loss in no longer directing his muse. He began writing roles for her, guiding her as if they were still on Broadway, even as they now stood in their living room, with a child crying in the background. Audrey loved deeply, but she began to tire. She no longer wanted to be an actress in a life Mel was directing. She wanted to be a mother, a wife authentically. But Mel had grown used to seeing her through a lens. When she turned down a role he offered, he went silent for a whole week. No fight, no sulking, just silence. People began to whisper about their rift, but they still appeared together hand in hand at premieres, smiling before cameras. They were the perfect couple, flawless, polished. But at night, Audrey would open Mel's old letters, reread those early words of love, and wonder, would he still write this way if she were just a wife, not a muse? Mel once said, "Only an actor can truly understand another actor." But maybe he had forgotten, no one feels lonelier than an actor only loved under the lights. Mel grew distant, not through words, but through widening gaps between schedules. They became shadows passing each other in a shared home. No anger, no arguments, just no longer in rhythm. Audrey once played a runaway princess in Roman Holiday, but this time it wasn't the princess who ran, it was the king who left the stage. In a quiet villa in Switzerland, where Audrey had chosen to settle after the brightness of the silver screen faded, there was a small room with an old wooden desk. Inside its drawer were countless letters without addresses. This was where she wrote, not to Hollywood, not to the public, but to herself. Audrey had never been one to speak much. She wrote, because in words she could be honest without hurting anyone. There was a letter for Mel written then, tucked away. "My dearest, I remember when you taught me how to breathe on stage. I thought love was learning to breathe together until I realized we were suffocating, sharing air in a space that no longer belonged to both of us." A letter to herself. "Dear Audrey, the girl who believed love could bridge any distance. But darling, sometimes love is just the sum of two lonely people trying to be polite." In a scrap of paper with just one line folded tightly. "How do you love someone without losing yourself?" Mel during these years was no longer the man he had been. He grew quieter, often staring out windows for hours. They both knew something was fading, not for lack of effort, but because their efforts now led in opposite directions. To outsiders, they were the model couple. But inside the house, with its soft afternoon light and faint piano notes, Audrey wrote letters to a man sitting in the next room, yet whom she no longer knew how to call by anything other than the father of my son. She never mailed those letters, because she knew if something needed to be said aloud, love was no longer strong enough to hold it in. So each time she finished one, she folded it gently, locked it away, learning that not all roles need a final scene, and not all love needs an audience to be real. One October morning, Audrey sat in her garden. Sean was playing with fallen leaves beneath a chestnut tree. The sun glowed faintly on his soft hair, and for that moment Audrey was not a film star, not a wife clinging to a crumbling marriage. She was simply a mother, quiet, grateful. She realized then for years she had lived under the weight of others' expectations. The on-screen princess, Mel's muse, the symbol of elegance. But perhaps for the first time she truly wanted something for herself to be Sean's mother. She began refusing roles, even those directed by Mel. He didn't understand. "You're the light," he said. "You can't walk off stage." But Audrey smiled softly. "I'm still the light, just not for the screen. For my child now." That refusal stung Mel, not with anger but with a slow withdrawal. He spoke less, came home later, and sometimes didn't come at all. Audrey never blamed him. She understood. Some people love by standing in the spotlight together. Others love by stepping out of it so one can have peace. But they no longer shared the same kind of love. As Sean grew, Audrey found a happiness no award had ever brought. Simple breakfasts, laughter, tiny feet running in sunshine, these became her most cherished performance. She had lived amidst Hollywood's glamour, but never felt as whole as when walking through a village market holding her child's hand. In motherhood, Audrey awakened. She no longer needed validation from the screen or the press. No ceremonies, no applause. Just one thing: peace. Mel faded from family photos, from her journals, not out of bitterness, but because she had stopped waiting. Love didn't die. It simply drifted away like a boat leaving shore on a windless day without tears. Only a quiet acceptance. In 1968, while the world shifted with protests, women's movements, and artistic rebellion, Audrey Hepburn quietly filed for divorce. No drama, no scandals, just a gentle statement from her representative. After many years together, Miss Audrey Hepburn and Mr. Mel Ferrer have agreed to separate amicably. The press was puzzled, the public stunned. They had been the epitome of grace, elegance, unity. Now their parting was like a velvet glove laid on a table, silent but final. Mel didn't attend Audrey's final film premiere that year. He withdrew. She never mentioned him in interviews. They didn't separate with slams, but with slow retreat, like two lights dimming in the same room where no one wanted to keep the bulb on. Years later, Audrey told her son, "You don't need anger to part. Some people are only meant to walk with us for a time, and that can be enough." She didn't remarry right away. She didn't search for replacement. She lived with Sean, moved to a small farm near Lausanne, raised chickens, gardened, learned silence. She was no longer Audrey Hepburn of Breakfast at Tiffany's. She was Audrey, the woman who had loved, lost, forgiven, and finally understood. Mel Ferrer went on to direct Remarried years later. His life flowed quietly, but it said he always kept a small photo of Audrey in his wallet, the one taken after Ondine, when she still looked at him with full, trusting eyes. Divorce wasn't the end. Sometimes it's the way two people can fully live what's left, no longer performing for the other, but finally living for themselves. Audrey never spoke ill of Mel. Never. In memoirs, interviews, letters, she always spoke of him with unwavering respect. "He taught me so much, and for that I'm grateful." So though they no longer shared a roof in her memory, he never truly left. After the divorce, Audrey didn't rush into a new relationship. In a world of flashy romance and film gossip, she chose the quiet. In those early days without Mel, she thought she'd be lonely. But instead, she found herself. She grew flowers, cooked, taught Sean poetry. Sometimes she'd sit in the garden for hours just listening to birdsong. No one called her Audrey Hepburn here, just Sean's mother, or the lady who smiles at the neighbor's cat. Then one day she met Robert Wolders, a Dutch actor, widowed, gentle, and wise. No grand gestures, no candlelit dates. They simply found one another, two souls who had known loss, now seeing calm in each other's gaze. Robert didn't want Audrey to act again. He didn't write scripts for her, didn't craft an image. He let her just be: no makeup, no lines, no pleasing anyone. For the first time in years, Audrey discovered a love that required no performance. "I used to think love was what made your heart race," she said. "Now I know it's when you can breathe easiest beside someone." Robert never asked her to return to the stage. He sat in the audience of her daily life, quietly holding her hand. When she was ill, he brewed tea, changed towels, read the newspaper aloud, because she didn't want her glasses. In a letter to a friend, Audrey once wrote, "Robert doesn't make me feel young again. He helps me forgive my youth." That love, simple unknown to headlines, was the one Audrey kept to the end. No stage, no applause. Just a little garden where flowers bloomed every morning, and one man waited for her rain or shine. By the end of 1992, as snow-blanketed rooftops in the small Swiss town of Tolokanaz, Audrey Hepburn knew time was running short. Doctors diagnosed her with advanced colon cancer. The news came quietly, just like how she had always lived. No tears, no panic. Audrey simply turned to Robert Wolders and said, "Let's go home. I don't want to die in a hospital." And so Robert chartered a private jet to bring her back from Los Angeles to Switzerland with a basket of orchids, her favorite flowers, on board. In her final days, Audrey spoke nothing of films or fame. She didn't reminisce about golden days or awards. Instead, she read poetry to Sean, wrote a few notes for UNICEF, and occasionally stared at an old black and white photo, she and Mel Ferrer, on the Ondine stage, when they were still a couple untouched by life's fractures. She didn't tear the photo, didn't hide it. She simply folded it gently, like one might close an old chapter in a beloved book. Not forgotten, but no longer needing to return. Before Christmas that year, a close friend, a photographer, asked to take her final portrait. At first, Audrey refused. But one sunny morning, she put on a soft white sweater, tucked an orchid into her hair, and sat by the wooden window frame. No makeup, no props. Just a 63-year-old woman, frail yet with eyes still as clear as they were in youth. The photo never went public. It wasn't sold to the press. It was placed in a modest frame beside Sean's bedside, and later became a family heirloom he would always carry with him. It wasn't a farewell image. It was a mirror reflecting a life that had spanned from a ballerina during wartime to a global icon, to a mother, a lover, and finally, a woman brave enough to simply be herself. No stage, no audience, just someone who hoped quietly to be seen. On January 20th, 1993, Audrey Hepburn passed away in her sleep in the little house facing the apple orchard, where morning birds still sang and sunlight filtered through bare branches. Robert Wolders held her hand until the end. Sean stood silently by her side. No one sobbed loudly, because the woman they loved didn't leave in sorrow. She simply closed a long performance like all great artists do, quietly after the applause had faded. The world reported the news. They called her a legend, an eternal icon, a cinematic goddess. But to those who truly knew Audrey, she never sought those titles. She was simply a woman hoping to live kindly, peacefully, sincerely. At the small funeral in Tolokanaz, there was no orchestra, just a violinist playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, Audrey's favorite. The flowers were wildflowers, daisies, and orchids picked from the very garden she had nurtured in her final years. Mel Ferrer did not attend, but according to an old friend days later, a white wreath arrived without a name. Just a small card, with grace always. M. No one knew if he cried, but everyone understood some loves don't need to last a lifetime to be engraved on the heart forever. A few months later, Audrey was posthumously awarded the Jean Hirschholt Humanitarian Award by the Academy, honoring her lifetime work with children through UNICEF. Sean accepted the Oscar on her behalf. Holding the statue, he said, "My mother once said the spotlight can be blinding, but the heart of a child is the only light she ever truly wanted to shine in." Audrey's final role wasn't on film, not in a Givenchy dress, but in the eyes of children in Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, where she had knelt, wiped faces, fed milk, and left behind something more lasting than a name kindness. And so that story, that final role, didn't end when she passed. It lived on in the unsent letters in the last photograph by the window, in each flower planted anew every spring. Because some people never truly disappear. They simply step off the stage when the last scene has been fulfilled.